continuación profundizaremos en una temática inherente a Innova Latam, los ecosistemas de innovación. En un ecosistema de innovación, diferentes actores, incluidas empresas, universidades, gobiernos y la sociedad civil, intercambian un gran valor. En ese mismo intercambio se presenta un entorno colaborativo para generar crecimiento. Para esto queremos innovar y queremos invitar precisamente para hablar sobre este tema al presidente de la Junta Directiva del Global Innovation Management Institute, el señor Jonash, una organización sin ánimo de lucro que certifica mejores prácticas en innovación a nivel mundial. Él fue socio senior de Monitor Group, donde fundó y dirigió su práctica de innovación global. Y además queremos contarles que durante más de 20 años ha sido director de la práctica de gestión de tecnología e innovación de Arthur D. Little en todo el mundo. Welcome, Mr. Jonash. Un muy fuerte aplauso.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back in Cartagena. I have not been here since right before COVID when we had another conference like this. So it's great to be back. Great to see that pretty much everybody's recovered. What I'd like to do, you've heard a lot this morning about different perspectives on the ecosystems, different ways to look at it, different emerging technologies that's going to make it easier to transform those ecosystems. What I'd like you to do, I'd like to bring it back to is your own ecosystem. Your own ecosystem. I want you to think about this. I'm going to talk about a little bit in terms of your ecosystem. There are a gazillion ecosystems out there for large industries, small industries and clusters, for individual businesses. I want you to think of the one that you can most or want to most influence. Because as Hitendra said, there are CEOs who are aiming high. That's all well and good. There are leaders who are leading other parts of the organization to make change happen. And what I want to focus on also is the collaborators. The last few speakers have talked a lot about the collaborators. They all have a critical role in transforming our ecosystems and in doing it fast enough to keep up with the pace of change. As Hitendra and others have said, you know, we have to manage the present, but we also have to prepare for the future. And we have to be able to do both of those things. So think of your own ecosystem. I'm going to talk about three things: how you define your ecosystem, how you see and manage kind of actionable insights from that, and kind of checklist and journey map that you might do for your ecosystem. So first, on defining the ecosystem, as in anything, you have to do the assessment, right? You have to assess the strengths and weaknesses of your ecosystem. And just as an example, right now, we're in the middle of doing a major project for Airbus, along with the carriers, KLM and Delta, along with the airports of Schiphol and Hartsfield. It's the first time that's been done before because the system is so broken, nobody's been able to manage it across those different stakeholders. So if you look at a traditional ecosystem, there are people focused on making the aircraft, putting products and services in it, delivering it, markets, but there isn't anybody who has enough control to manage the whole system. And so, since most people don't want to be accountable for something they can't control, they don't address the kinds of issues of health and wellness and safety and sustainability that kind of pervade the whole system. So if you look at this in general and you assess it, you're undoubtedly going to find out that the best opportunities for innovation are actually at the intersection, at the interface between these different steps. It's not within one step. There are companies, there are parties who are very focused on production or delivery or whatever, and they're all over those innovations. The ones that aren't being done effectively are the ones that cut across or exist at the interface of these. So as you do the assessment, think not only where the strengths and weaknesses are, but where the biggest opportunities are to innovate that ecosystem. So once you've done that, what's important these days is to really profile the players and relationships in that ecosystem. So with, again, new technology, people were talking a little bit earlier about personas and simulating kind of behaviors. That's what you can do now. You couldn't do that 10 years ago. And so when you look at your ecosystem, really find a way to develop actionable profiles of the players in that ecosystem, the companies, the individuals who need to kind of be able to work together to make change happen in that ecosystem. So on the one hand, you have a typical cluster ecosystem of an individual industry. And you have a bunch of different businesses that are involved in production and delivery and buying and selling. And it's difficult, but in English we like to say it's like herding cats, but at least the cats all like cream. So they're all trying to optimize that system. So for most ecosystems, from a business point of view, they're pretty well established. Now for new businesses, be it green hydrogen or something else, they're not very well established. So you really have to look at building a new ecosystem. But on this side, they're pretty well handled. On the other side, the things that people talk about as the triple helix, it's a much more challenging situation because you have dogs instead of cats. And they're even more difficult to rally. Some of them are, the universities are concerned about research and education, the companies about experience and training, governments about policy and regulation. And so you have all these new ecosystem players who don't play by the same rules. They have different priorities. The challenge is that in most industries we've worked with, and Atender and I have been doing this for 40 years or so, the challenge is that the industries that only have the left-hand side there do well. The ones who have both do by far superior performance delivery of results. But very often people avoid doing what they have to do to make the right side work. But that's where all the benefit is. So if you can do this, you have a winning solution. But again, it's cats and dogs, and they don't necessarily share a lot of trust and respect. So the main thing you have to do is find tools and techniques that really build that trust and respect to last a long time. And when you do that, you end up with powerful clusters, as they were talking about a few minutes ago in Florianopolis. So that's what it takes to really build powerful systems. So the next thing you can do after you kind of look at who the players are and map their behavior and simulate their behavior is really to look at a journey map. So what's the journey map within your cluster, within the business players, and what's the journey map beyond? So in the journey map for the industry itself, typically you're assessing strengths and weaknesses, you're developing multiple assets and capabilities to fill key gaps, and you're beginning to build bilateral relationships, trust, and respect in important areas. As you begin to get more mature and higher value, you move from transactional relationships to strategic partnerships. And that's the important kind of breakthrough in the power of these ecosystems. So those companies that are able to do that can then move on and collaborate to win in existing markets as well as in new opportunity areas, and they learn how to share the benefits and value as opposed to fighting over it. They're making the pie bigger. And that's kind of the lesson on this. Most companies, or most industry clusters, the typical state of play is kind of in the middle. So if you're operating in that kind of cluster, think about what you could do to move beyond that kind of muddle in the middle where you have everybody kind of beginning to do things that are important but not fully committed. On the other hand, you have the triple helix where things are much messier, particularly in a climate where there's not a lot of trust. I mean, I talked to universities in the US, and they all have long trusted relationships, MIT, Stanford, et cetera, with companies around the world. In Europe, they don't trust each other further than they can throw each other. Nobody believes that the academic institutions can really help them at all. The advantage I think you have in Latin America is the jury's still out. It's kind of all newly developing. It's been developing over the last 5 or 10 years. So there's a real opportunity to build strong trust. And so the steps here are find areas of alignment and common interest in important innovation opportunity areas, agree on clear organizational and programmatic commitments. There was this discussion this morning about a number of initiatives that are doing that now. Provide adequate space and time. That's the big one that starts to get these transitioning to a more powerful ecosystem. Whoops. Oh, sorry. Working together and also always aiming for both improved profitability and value creation. So in the environmental ecosystem, it's a somewhat different thing because you're trying to get high impact programs that serve different objectives of the different stakeholders. The universities have to be happy, the chambers and trade and professional associations have to be happy, the businesses have to be happy, government has to be happy. There's a lot of people to please in this process. But you want to find programs that create as much strategic alignment as possible. Otherwise, they'll fall apart before they ever get out the door. So high impact programs, innovation competitions involving players from universities, from businesses, from government, et cetera, are really important just to get people begin to trust each other and respect each other and the things they can bring. People talked a lot of this morning about incubators and accelerators. Those are obviously great ways to bring people together, both physically and virtually. The industry university innovation challenge programs, we run those every year. Innovation Olympics programs, other people do as well. And then professional training programs as opposed to or in addition to academic training programs, and then joint curriculum design. So these are the things that most well-established triple helix systems do. We're a long ways from most of these in Colombia, but we don't have some of the barriers, for instance, that they have with academic institutions in Europe. So in many ways, it's easier for us to leapfrog. Watch-outs. You need to make sure you have leadership that has kind of the empathy and social intelligence we've talked about, both hard and soft components that fully understand the gaps they need to fill, that all work together again and understand the strengths and weaknesses. So those are things to really kind of drive forward with each of the two ecosystems. There are these cultural tenets that when we talked about the Sobriety Leadership Program, it's really critical. If you don't have mutual trust and respect, and it's game over. So everything's got to continue to build mutual trust and respect among the players. You've got to have both long and short-term wins. All the players have long-term and short-term objectives. You can't just do short-term, you can't just do long-term. Common interest in assets. There's a lot of assets out there when we did the work with Cali and in Barranquilla and every place else. There's lots of assets that are underused that can be shared. But people, again, have to trust how those can best be shared. And then strategic alignment, because they all have different stated objectives, and obtaining that strategic alignment is really important. So lastly, you want to look at all of these indicators. A lot of work has been done on measuring the effectiveness of triple helix systems, the place, the infrastructure, the collaborative ecosystem, the innovation solutions. And so you can measure it, and you should measure it. so that people know and can see what you're doing. And then lastly, what's a final checklist? Look for the most important and exciting opportunities, whether these are particular clusters or particular communities or whatever. Look for, identify the most important and exciting. What are the magnets that you can attract people to? Audit your value chain and ecosystems. Don't think you know it all. You see it from your perspective. This work I mentioned with Airbus, they thought they knew their ecosystem backwards and forwards. They knew all their suppliers, but they didn't know how the airports were making their decisions about how to dispose of waste from the lavatories or whatever. They just knew about what their suppliers and customers wanted. So audit those value chains, continue to stay on top of what's driving them. Find the best leaders to make it happen. These are, again, collaborative leaders. They can be anywhere in the organization. Yes, it's the CEO with the aiming high, but it's also with other leaders and collaborators who are going to make it all happen. Build and sustain mutual trust and respect. I've said it a million times, but it is the #1 thing that holds people back. And find effective programs to generate short-term wins and long-term commitments and sustainability. So that's it. It says my time's up. So thank you.